Alright guys, so this presentation is titled The Great War Begins, also the start of World War One. So what this presentation is going to look at is how the different alliances come together to kind of work together to fight World War One, as well as the hardships that were going on during the war. So when we look at it, nations take sides. So the Central Powers themselves are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Going against the Central Powers are the Allies, Great Britain, France, and Russia. So essentially this is kind of like a Major League Baseball game when there's a brawl that begins, right? The pitcher hits the batter gets all mad, and he charges the mound. And as he charges the mound, one team comes out, and as one team comes out, the other comes out, and then there's a big brawl in the hands. Essentially, that's what happens with World War One. Austria-Hungary declares war, and as Austria-Hungary declares war, then everyone else kind of jumps in the fray. So in 1914, the Western Front begins, and so does World War One. So Germany's big plan in World War One was the Schlieffen Plan. And that plan essentially was to defeat France in the west and then fight Russia in the east. So they wanted to send as many troops as possible to the west to invade France, beat France, and then go destroy Russia with all the resources they had left. In September, the Germans had surrounded France, so their plan was going perfectly. However, the Allies counterattacked at the Marne River, and they actually won that battle. Now, while Germany was undoubtedly still very deep into France's territory, the counterattack and the small win for the Allies was significant because it demonstrated that Germany would have to fight a two-front war, that France would not fall as easily as they had hoped for. And that brings us to trench warfare. So trench warfare is this new style of warfare during World War One, and it's where soldiers literally fight from trenches that they have dug themselves. While you would imagine that the trench warfare would be not so deadly, the exact opposite happened. In trench warfare, thousands and thousands of people died. So on top of thousands of people dying, there was only a change of land was very, very minimal. Meaning that unlike previous wars where maybe thousands of people die over a 10-mile span, in trench warfare, thousands of people are dying over not even a quarter of a mile. So the distance that's gained and lost in trench warfare is very, very minimal. And how trench warfare literally works is that one army has their trenches dug in, the other army has their trenches dug in, and they're facing each other. And in the middle of them is something called no man's land. And no man's land is essentially a barren wasteland that just has barbed wire. And the barbed wire is there because it makes charges more difficult. It's really hard to charge, obviously, into the enemy lines if you have to go through barbed wire. So while charges themselves are not successful, generally speaking, that doesn't mean people couldn't die in trench warfare. Artillery fire actually killed men within the trenches, so the artillery fire would be at the very back end of the trenches, the back line, and they would just fire artillery rounds all day long. And while they weren't very accurate, at some point they would hit something. Now, on top of artillery fire, there was other new weaponry. So the weapons were machine guns, poison gas, and tanks. And really the development of these weapons was to try to make the warfare faster. So it wouldn't be at such a stalemate, such a standstill. Unfortunately, the exact opposite happened. So the trench warfare slowed everything down to a crawl. The Battle of Somme actually ended in November. And that was a big battle in France. You're looking at about a 2-month duration, a little over that from September to November. But even in that small amount of time, both sides, the Allies and the Triple Alliance, suffered major casualties, over 500,000 on both sides, actually. So a lot of people died in that small period of time. Now, while there is that big battle going on the Western Front, that does not mean the Eastern Front was not also active. So on the Eastern Front, Germany was fighting Russia the whole time. Fortunately, on the Eastern Front, the war was more mobile, so fighting wasn't dug down into trenches really as much, but that doesn't mean the casualties and the numbers of deaths was any lower, because thousands of people once again died on the Eastern Front as well. However, on the Eastern Front, unlike the Western Front, Russia was able to advance into both Germany and Austria-Hungary. So the Allies were able to gain land on the Eastern Front, unlike on the Western Front. However, the same thing happened to the Allies, where Germany and Austria-Hungary were able to push back Russia. Now that's very significant because in 1916, Russia war effort is on the brink of collapse, and that is mainly because they are not industrialized. If we look back and we reflect on industrialization, we know that it's all about factories and how factories can produce mass amounts of material such as cloth and weapons and things like that. Russia does not have that capability at this point in time. So they're definitely at a detriment. So they're definitely behind the game in that regard. So the supplies they can get their soldiers is not nearly adequate. However, even though the supplies they can't get their soldiers isn't adequate, they make up for it in the sheer amount of numbers of soldiers they have. So the real asset in fighting the war is their number of people willing to fight for the cause. For 3 years, Russia was able to actually go in and fight in World War I with limited resources, just because as one man dies, another is able to take his place. So army never seems to fade. So that is essentially the start of the Eastern and Western Front of World War II.